into our alchemy call today. I I'm Kat Verlaine. If you have not met me yet, if this is your first time here, if this is your first time watching the replay, welcome in. I like to do these calls every Wednesday as a way for us to just connect in and talk about kind of the deeper conversations of what comes up in yoga. And so I remember when I first started yoga, no one told me that like my whole life was going to change, that like it was going to reveal layers and layers and layers of like all of this stuff, because you start to see things when you do yoga. And so I kind of like to have this as like almost like therapy sessions, like as you are uncovering all of this energy moving through your body, as your body is opening up, like let's move through this together. And today, what I wanted to talk about that many of you reach out to me for is like sensitivity. And so your sensitive nature. I wanted to theme this call because you can comment in the chat how many of you feel like as you do this practice, as you get more in tune to the moon and to the seasons, it's like things are actually affecting you more. Like the full moons actually affect you more than they ever did before, or certain foods are affecting you more, or certain people are influencing you more, or having an effect on your body. So let me know in the chat if this is you, if you've noticed these things arising, because I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the first universal principles, and that is the principle of polarity. So polarity is essential. Yeah, Jesse said 100. Polarity is essential for us to have experience. And so when we were all united as one consciousness, right, just not having any duality, just being purely in the eternal moment, right, when we split from that initial unity, right, from one is two, we got polarity or duality. And so what that did is it allowed us to have an experience of the self, the individuated soul. So like each of our own unique expressions on this planet. And with polarity comes a certain amount of tension, right? Because when we have sadness, it also means that there's happiness. When there's dark, it also means there's light. When there is a waxing moon, it means there's a waning moon. And so when we have this tension, it actually creates like friction, right? And friction creates the energy that cells need. And so when we get sick, what like and chronic sickness, what happens is that our cells, they have positive and negative pole, just like a battery, just like the earth has the north and south pole, just like you have a north and south pole, your cell has this positive and negative pole. And when we start to get sick and have chronic illness over time, our cells, the polarity actually diminishes. So there's not as much tension in the cell. And so when that happens, the body is not as responsive. And so when we are, for instance, not taking care of our bodies, or, you know, you see the person that's like never taking care of their health and they never get sick, and you're just like, what gives? Like, why are you getting sick all the time? But their immune system isn't even able to respond to anything in the environment because they don't have that tension in their cell. And so, and in all of the cells, because one is a reflection of all of them. And so polarity is essential, and tension is essential for health, right? For a really strong body. And as we clean the body, as we purify the body, if you're into detoxing or cleansing, right? Like I do a big cleanse every single season, and I just clean everything out. And this gives you like a clean slate in which when you bring things into your body, you're far more sensitive now to the effects of these things because you've in a sense taken them out, right, of your day-to-day. And so by taking yourself out of your day-to-day and the habitual programming of you, and you turn within and you start to do some yoga or some breath work or some meditation, you do the yoga, which is creating tension, right, in your body. You're creating tension in the muscles, right? And it's not the bad tension. It's the tension of like doing something different, moving your body in a different way, right? What happens is that you actually start to become more responsive to what is going on in your day-to-day. And now all of a sudden that person that you're hanging out with all the time, you're like, this person's really negative and they're always making me feel down all the time. They're like never saying anything positive, and I don't know if I want to hang out with them today. Little things like that will start to have bigger effects on your body because you're actually spending more time internal and creating the conditions for the cells in your body to hold a greater charge or a greater polarity or a greater distance between the positive and the negative. And so when we can increase that charge, what we're doing is we're increasing our sensitivity. And so we are especially as women, and if you've been following right now, I'm doing like the 5 elements within your menstrual cycle, as a woman, right? And we are, as women, more sensitive than men, and I have a lot more women in here than men. So it's just our nature, because we are nature. We are the portal through which new beings come through. We are incredibly porous when we bleed. If you're a mother and you've had a child, you know how porous it is after you give birth and how sensitive you are to everything around you. And it's because this part is very biological, and the biological component is very instinctual, right? And so we have instincts when we're really in a relationship with our environment, the natural environment. And we start to lose our instincts when our life becomes very soft, so to speak. So like if you're living in an apartment all the time and you don't go outside often, or if you like go from your apartment to work and you're not like in the environment very often, right? We become less instinctual. And so it creates the conditions for the cells, in a sense, to diminish the polarity or become apathetic. And we aren't as responsive in our bodies. We aren't feeling the effects so much. And, you know, I have a really powerful example of this is like I live off grid and we have all solar, and I have like no one around us, and like there's like no Wi-Fi signal, there's nothing. And every time I plug something in, I can hear it. I can hear the electricity, and my daughter can too. She's like, "Oh, you just plug something in, I hear it." And like, how many of you hear your electricity, right? Because we become so accustomed to specific things in our reality. And so this call is an opportunity for you to know, right, that when you do this work, when you are practicing, whether it's yoga, whether it's breath work, whether it's meditation, whether you're just listening to these words and they're hitting home in a specific way, you are going to become more sensitive to your surroundings, because you're feeling more of what your body needs at every moment. And so we have this primal instinctual part, right? That is like run away when there's a mountain lion, right? Or like when there's a fear, like you've got to fight or you have to like flee, right? Or freeze, you know, that's the stress response. When we're constantly in the stress response state, we actually don't have any more tension in the body. And so, for instance, it's like marathon runners, like they're putting their body in stress for a tremendously long amount of time, and like they think that they're whatever they're doing it for, right? It doesn't actually, the body stops responding to what you're doing to it. And so it's more effective to like sprint for a short period of time if you're like trying to get healthy or lose weight or whatever, right, than to run a marathon. It's about putting yourself in these moments of tension and then returning back to a stable baseline. And so when we're living really fast-paced lives and stressed out all the time without really knowing it, and going from here to there, and, you know, like always, you know, feeling the cars around us, like it's very stressful to drive, for instance. And we've become so accustomed to it that we don't even notice the stresses of like all of the things that we're doing as a human, multitasking, looking around for the cars. Like if your kid's in the back, you're like trying to talk to your kid, you're like trying to do all the things. Like this is incredibly stressful on the body because it's so far from nature. And so the next part of that we talked about last week is the intuitive part. And so this is more of the like less biological instincts, and it's more of like the spiritual instincts, we'll call it, right? And so this intuition is what comes through as the deeper knowing that your super senses, when you pratyahara, close in your senses to your inner world, tune into, right? So whether it's, you know, foreseeing the future, or having this like thought drop in where you're like, I have to act on this right now, or hearing something, right? Or even like tasting, right? Like you can taste without even eating. I mean, just think of like taking your hands in a juicy lemon and like, you know, just like taste that lemon like in your hands without even having a lemon there. Like you will start to feel, right, the saliva. You'll start to like have that experience of the tartness of it, right? Where your face kind of like puckers. And so this is where our mind is very powerful, and where I want you to know that it's completely normal and natural. Then as you begin to do this work, as you're starting to understand and see, like to truly perceive nature in winter and the closing in, and how much your body just wants to rest, and how much your practice just wants to turn inwards, and how all of nature is doing it. And then every time, like especially right now as the moon is waning, when you're trying to do something or get something done, it's like you're a lot slower. It's like you're moving through molasses because it's the nature of the influences that are raining down on you. And so even if you are living in a city, even if you are living this fast-paced modern life, you start to become aware. And the moment you're aware, you will start to feel things on a very deep level because now all of a sudden you're paying attention. And so that attention is key, right? Where you're putting your attention is where that tension is being created in your reality. And so I'll like the same thing with spring, like you're going to start to feel like you want to go out. And if you've just overdone it all winter and you're completely depleted and your kidneys are exhausted, in springtime, you're not going to have that rising up energy that's going to have this huge vision and be like, this is what I want to accomplish this year. You never gave yourself the rest to really tend the soil of winter. And so when we start to play with this practice in particular, and many practices of awareness, which is what it is, right? You're being aware of your body, of how your body is moving, of where your body is in time and space. You're aware of the people that you're around. You're aware of the programming that you're listening to. You're starting to see how specific things have specific effects on your day-to-day. So if you wake up and the first experience you have is someone's grumpy, like it's going to color your day. And so when we become more aware, we become more sensitive because now we are learning to play with energy in a very, very different way. And so you can pop in the chat if you have any questions about this or if you're feeling this at all, or we can have like a bouncing off moment. But your sensitivity is your gift. And so in nature that is, deers and like all of the creatures of nature. I just saw like a million deers right now, so they're on my mind. They are very instinctual, right? They live with nature, so they are feeling their environment in that way that is very biological. Like, I need to survive. If something behind me is a threat, I need to run away, right? This is very biological. As humans, since we have consciousness, right? Since we can extend our creation consciously out into the world, we get this other layer of the intuition that we get to develop. And that intuition is like, how do I go about my day now that I have all of this information? What are ways in which I can weave in different health practices so that I can balance the effects of modern day living, right? So that I can honor my body and still fulfill my obligations, because there is going to be this duality, because we can't all just lay in the sun all day, right? I wish we could. And so, but that tension, when you play with it, it becomes a gift. And that's why it's really important to find like a sweet spot in your life where you're really excited about it, right? And that's what these practices are cultivating: joy, right? They're cultivating your grace. They're cultivating your perceptions so that you shift your perception from always feeling like there's lack to knowing that there's abundance, right? It's just all based upon your perception. And so when we start to shift perceptions and we start to shift our practices to embody more of a joyful state, because we feel better, because we are more aware, because we're, starting to see what things are having what effects on our body, and we can decide whether we want them in our lives, right? The gifts of sensitivity are really constantly reorienting the soul, the self, to its highest timeline or the highest path, or like the path of the soul. And so this path, when you're aligned to it, right, and your body is becoming more sensitive to it, you're going to be like a metronome or a tuning fork to it, right, to always calibrate to it. And I always bring these calls back to that theme, because your soul is meant to traverse a specific territory. And we forget the moment we drop into a body, right? We get conditioned by our family, by our peers, by society, by the institutions that were created from a past structure. Yet we were born for the future. And so we have all of these layers now to take away, because we were programmed or indoctrinated into the past. And so we are here for the future. And when you enhance the sensitivity, when you play with it, when you work with it, when you say, oh yeah, this full moon is affecting me, I'm not going to go out today because I'm probably not going to be a good person for others, right? Or like, I need to take more time for myself so I can calibrate this energy in my body. What you're really doing is you're, again, tuning to that path for you, because your soul has these urges and it knows what you're meant to be doing at every moment. Shayna said, I'm so glad you mentioned the waning moon and the energy around it. I've planned and tried to work through certain projects for the last 4 days and have hit a wall. even after an internet outage had really made me stop and be in my body and space yesterday. Yeah. And it's a Mercury retrograde, right? And so we have all of these different cosmic influences, all of these different layers. And so this is where these practices are really to teach you how to wait for the moment to catch the wave and go. Right. And and so this is where like the modern day world doesn't have space for this mind frame, right? Because it's like, I need a deadline, right? But there are ways in which, like, if you have the spaciousness of time, right, and you can play with it in very small ways, it's like, okay, the moment I feel that urge that it's going to flow, I'm going to get going. And then it's so much less swimming against the current and so much more creation, right? The ego wants to make things, but the soul wants to be in creation, right? And so the ego has a very specific way it needs to look. Like Shayna said, like, I need to finish this project in 4 days, and like the power's going out, it just feels stuck, right? The ego's like, no, but there's a moment, like we have to do it right now. And the soul is like, no, the soul knows that there's a flow that it needs to catch in order for it to create from its soul so that it's easy, right? So that it's fluid. And so when we become more sensitive, we start to hit those tension points where it's like, oh, this doesn't feel easy and fluid. So I'm not going to go that way, right? And it's not, you're not being lazy, right? You're not being passive. You're not like waiting for something to happen. Every day you're still acting, but it comes from a very different place of not thinking it needs to be a specific way or end at a specific time, or like that you need to make it in a specific way, right? It's more, okay, this is what is lined up for my day and how can I flow with it rather than fighting with it, right? And so there's going to be different times in which to do specific things. And so also in winter, one of the big things is like, who would plant their tomato seeds in winter and just put them outside, right? Water them, it's cold, there's like no sun, the tomatoes are like, what are you doing? Right? That's what we do as humans. We're like, I'm going to start a new project in winter. And then we're like, why can't I do this? This isn't feeling right. This isn't feeling easy. This isn't feeling fluid. And we're forcing it. And then our kidneys don't get this opportunity to rest and restore and to replenish their vitality. And then all of a sudden, it's like springtime comes around and we've got nothing left. And so there's specific timings, right, when things need to occur. And so this is where, when you look at like lunar-based calendars, all planting cultures were lunar-based calendar. And that's why as a woman, your menstrual cycle and like your even life cycle is a lunar-based calendar. And so if you aren't in my lunar embodiment course, I go through all of this, but when you can start to take these like elements in this 5-element theory into every part of your life cycle, your menstrual phase, your seasons of the year, right? You start to really see that these energies hold true through everything, because it's another pattern that repeats through existence. And so when we can align to that, right? When we can start to align to these seasonal energies, when we can start to align to the moon, and to even just notice, like, who knows when the waning moon rises? Does anyone in the chat? Like, we don't know these simple things. And so does the waning moon rise in the morning or at night? And now that you know it's a waning moon, and if you've seen the moon today, you might be like, oh yeah, it rises in the morning or in the night, right? Like, it's going to always be there in the morning, and it's going to get closer and closer and closer and closer and closer to sunrise. And so we have all of this lunar influence. The moon rises the day, right? So it's very lunar. And what's lunar is like what's lunatic, what's crazy, what's like, not based on linear time. And so the whole entire 2-ish weeks of the waning moon, the moon births the day. Whereas when the moon is growing full, right, the sun births the day. And so when you start to see this, you start to realize that there's very different energies that you're playing with every single day. And you start to see that, like, yeah, there's like a creative flow happening in these days when the moon births the day. There's a lot of creative energy, but the day starts with the moon. And then when the moon is getting to full, you start the day, like if you wake up before the sun, you have the empty space of nothing. You have no sun, no moon, no pull, no push. And you just literally get to be in the center of your time and space without having the influences. And so that's a really beautiful time to actually be in like the potentiality of creation. And so you get different meditative experiences during these different times, right? And so when we start to learn about all of this stuff, it's like that. This is what the alchemists were doing, right? They were trying to really understand nature so that they could tune in and align all of their efforts because their whole thing was longevity or immortality, if you really look into like the, the Philosopher's Stone. But the path of least resistance, right? Because when we can align to it and use our energies well, and as a society, if everyone was doing this, the society would flow so much easier. There would be these huge like ups and downs and all the things, because there would be times when people would pull back, times when others would come in. It would be like this beautiful wave. But that's not predictable, because the moon's not predictable, right? And nature is predictable, but it's not in the way that society needs things measured by 24 hours. And so as these sensitive parts of you start to arise, and as you check in with yourself every morning, how do I actually feel today, right? That's why I love doing my yoga practice first. I love waking up first before anyone in my family wakes up, because then I can tune into me. I can see how I'm feeling. I can get to tune in with myself before everything else and everyone else needs something from me. And then that way I'm able to be like, okay, today I'm like exhausted. And so I can organize my day better to know that like I need to give myself grace. I need to give myself space. If I have a ton of energy, I'm like, okay, I'm going to fit more things into this day because I have the energy to actually do it. And I want to. I have the desire. And so this is where if every day looks the same and you're doing the same job every day and you're not doing, like different things to create that tension in your body, then you're not going to have that same sensitivity because you're not tuning in. And so when we get more sensitive, things just feel more intense. And we're also coming into very intuitive years, right? Where, Aquarius is air, and we're in the age of Aquarius now. And so that's air, it's like technology, it's like realizing how linked our minds are to each other, right? And so we have thoughts that come in out of nowhere. Well, they didn't come in out of nowhere, right? Someone was thinking of you, or something was hooking your mind, and you were just aware that it was being hooked. And so when we begin to slow down our mind through meditation, we can more easily distinguish between what just came through and what is of our own, right? And so there's just so many ways, first of all, to honor these sensitivities, because I do want to give you the tools to like know that, yeah, it's hard to be a sensitive human. And so one of my favorite ways to honor my sensitivity is to have boundaries, right? To when someone asks me something like, do you want to do this? Or can you meet me at this time? Or whatever it is, I like don't need to respond right away. I can just tune in with myself and be like, is this going to elevate me, especially in winter when you don't have a lot of like energy to be pouring into everything? Is this going to fill my cup? Is this going to be a reciprocated experience for me? Or am I just going to deplete my energy? And so you really get to take the time to know that you're not here to please everyone, that you're not here to be there for everyone, right? That you don't need to have the same friends throughout your whole entire lifetime, right? You get to have boundaries of like, is this going to serve my soul and what I want for myself or not? And this is where this selfishness does become selfless, because when you can honor these boundaries in yourself as you're becoming more and more aware and more sensitive, right? When you can honor those boundaries within yourself, then now all of a sudden you have energy and space and time for things that are really going to grow in your life, that are going to honor, right, that path that your soul wants to walk. Yeah, Justine says right on. Yeah, and older women know it, right? Like as we get older as women, it's like boundaries get stronger because we just stop messing around. And, when we're young, we're like, oh yeah, I remember when like early my 20s, I was like, I'll do anything. Like, come on, let me at it. And now it's like, no, not interested. Yeah, not just reacting to the flow of life. Yeah. And so then you become a very conscious co-creator. So like Justine said, you're not just reacting to the flow of life. It seems bananas now that I used to never want to say no to things. I know I went through this whole phase where I was like, just say yes. And then my yes phase quickly turned into like, I can say no. I don't need to be doing this. And so, and Jessie knows it too. When you have children, it's like the boundaries have to get strong. They do. And then because you're in the influential sphere of other beings, right? That you're also directing that current of energy. And so as women, we just have so much more to play with, right? You have the sun, the seasons that everyone's playing with, right? It's collective. We have the moon, also collective. But then we have a personal moon, right? Right when you hit menopause and you lose your moon, right? When you're no longer bleeding and you get your spiritual spring, you attune more now to the collective moon, right? And so that's the autumning. And so what really happens as a woman, and we go through these cycles and we become more sensitive to it, it's just like the luteal phase, right? It's the same parallel dimension, so to speak, right? If you blow up your luteal phase, that will be your menopause. So like if you have a lot of symptoms in luteal, you're going to want to learn to clear those out before menopause, perimenopause comes in, because then you're going to have a lot of symptoms rising up to that, because it's just all a reflection, right? And so when we hit our spiritual spring in menopause, and when we're no longer having our personal bleed, and we are, you know, we shed a lot of identities with that too, but we tune into such a deeper level of the collective, because what is personal eventually becomes super personal, right? It becomes universal. And so I really want to encourage all of you, like we talked about meditating last week, right? To become more in tune with your intuition, your deeper knowing, asking like, what's my next step? What do I need to do right now to align to my highest timeline, right? What do I need to do? And that will drop in. You just have to let it. The moment the mind starts chit-chatting and being like, no, you can't do that. Or like, you know, you can tell when the ego comes in, starts fighting, right? For its survival, right? You just know that the first thing that dropped in is what you're meant to do in that moment. And so really it's always, how can I be more of a conduit of love in this moment? That is all that we're here to do, is extend love, right? That is what lasts beyond all time and space. And so as we move through these various phases of our life, and as we move through the various phases of the moon and the various seasons, we have all of these layers, right? Can you see it now? All these layers in which you can become sensitive to. So if you're in winter right now in the northern hemisphere, we've got like winter, water, kidneys, right? And so that's the big realm of the season. The earth has bigger seasons that we can't even perceive because our lifetime is so small. So we could be in the lifetime of full summer or full autumn, right? In the whole season of the year, which could be thousands upon thousands of years, but it's all fractaled and patterned. So it has to be that way. And so when we're in the season of winter, right, that's the largest fractal of like, okay, rest, kidneys, right? The things of your safety, your fear, you know, that will arise. And then if you're in your moon, right, and you're bleeding right now, right, as the moon is waning or as the moon is dark, right, you're in a few of these winterings. And so it just, it amplifies that energy. Whereas if you're ovulating in winter and the moon is going to full, right, there's going to be this balance where you're going to be like, oh, it's winter, but I want to go out right now. I just want to like dance under the stars or do something. Like I just want to be with people. And it's just natural. It's biological, right? Your face has more symmetry in ovulation as a woman. So like if you work online, I try to record all of my reels during ovulation because it just looks more pleasing on the camera. It's subliminal, right? Because your body is subliminally messaging the opposite sex, like, it is time to reproduce, let's go. And so when you become more sensitive to these things and you start to realize the way that you're supposed to behave in obedience to nature, not in arrogance, which is seeing it and not acting, not in ignorance, which is like not even knowing at all, not even knowing that there's seasons that you can like respond to, right? But in obedience of, oh, this is what the animals are doing. This is what nature is doing. All the energy is going down to the root system. Obviously, my energy is going down to my root system. What is my root system? Kidneys, ancestry, right? It is reproduction. It is the soils, right? Nourishing the soils so that when spring arises, the soils are fruitful, right? They're fertile, so for you to plant those seeds. And so then there's those layers of like, what's the moon doing right now, right? Those are the two cosmic things that you can see at every moment. And that's why I love teaching them, because you don't need to pull out your astrology chart and start to see where all the things are transiting. Like, it takes a lot of like knowledge to do that. But what you can do is understand where the sun is, understand where the moon is, understand where your moon is and which life cycle you're in. And you have a lot of information to play with. And you will become more sensitive to everything that is going on around you because you're tuning into the deepest sensitivity there is, which is aligning to nature's law. And so when we align to these natural laws, right, this is what makes it through all times, nature's laws, because everything is programmed with this, right? All of organic nature is flowing that thread through. And so it will continue to go, because from one point, right, the point of origin, the point of inception, it's going to expand in every direction, right? And so we know that nature is abundant, right? Nothing disappears. Nothing is ever gone. Nothing is ever lost, ever. You can't get rid of anything. There's no way. Everything just turns into topsoil. And so from that point, ever expansion, right? And we know that when we're in fear, when we're in scarcity, when we're feeling like lack, we are in illusion, because it's not the truth. And so I just wanted to bring through this topic today because yes, You are sensitive. As you become more aware of this, you'll become more sensitive. And you'll be like, oh boy, what's the moon doing right now? How do I feel like this? What's going on? And you can start to check it out in the sky. And then you can have some confirmation. It's like, okay, this is what I'm working with right now. If you're working with a full moon and it's full summer and you're ovulating, you might not sleep. You just might not. And that's going to be okay, right? You don't have to like spin your tires about it. So how are you going to use it to your advantage, right? What are you going to do? Create something, right? Use that night to write poetry. Do whatever it is that you want to do. Yes to the confirmation, yeah. And then, you know, when you have those withdrawn times where you're like, oh, it's winter. Oh, the moon's waning. Oh, I'm in my luteal phase. I'm actually not supposed to be like bursting out into the world, creating plans, organizing things, like being out there. No, I'm supposed to be actually turning some of that into some kind of tangibleness inside of myself, right? You're like reflecting, and like it's a deep, like, you need reflection in order to plant seeds. You need reflection in order to go back out into the world. Otherwise, like Justine said, we become reactive, right? We're just reacting to everything around us, and we're staying in our karmic cycle. Cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. Where what we want to do is we want to get into our dharmic cycle, right? Where we're just on our path, when we're growing, when we're evolving, and that means things change all the time. All the time. You need to be ready for change, because another law of nature is impermanence. It's going to change again and again and again. And so when we do become more sensitive, understand what's going on around you, the seasons, what season you're in, what the moon is doing, what your personal moon is doing. If you do not understand your own personal lunar cycle, or if it seems like a mystery to you, then the lunar embodiment course is great, right? I have little workbooks in there so you can understand that the 5 elements also live in your blood, right? Which is winter is the first organ. Kidneys are cleansed on the first day of your bleed, and all the emotions. And so if you start to pay attention to your bleed, the kidneys, the liver is the second day, the heart, and then the spleen, and then the lungs, and then you just like divide it by however many days your bleed is, you'll start to see the emotional spectrum come up in each cycle, right? Of what you're cleansing. And if you had like a really big like month where you like were working through a lot of grief, right? The 5th day is going to be really intense, because your lungs are going to be clearing. And so it's a gift, because we get to go into the next cycle completely refreshed and completely new. And so when you start to understand those layers that you're playing with, right? And then you start to tune into you as an individuated soul and what you're meant to be doing in the moment based on how you're feeling, the desires that you have in that specific moment, right? It becomes less difficult to deal with how sensitive you become, right? Because then you can create boundaries that you need so that you can hold yourself in that container and know when's a good time to go out into the world, when's a good time to stay in the house, when's a good time to tell your family you're a little crazy today, right? Just to be honest with yourself and with the people around you, so you're not always, you know, having to show up exactly the same way, because that also diminishes the tension and the polarity within yourself, right? And so I always like to come back and bring it back in a few of these calls to those 3 initial principles: polarity, pattern, repetition. Those are the 3 universal principles. Every in has an out, every up has a down, every center has a circumference, right? And the pattern, spring, summer, autumn, winter, right? There's patterns in the seasons, there's patterns in your body, and the repetition happens again and again. Everything happens again and again, right? Your life cycle will happen again and again, right? When you're in your winter, you're formless. Your soul has left a form and is inhabiting a different time dimension, because there's no time, right? It's space, right? Until it descends back down and slows down to inhabit another form, so that you can recreate spring and summer and autumn again. And so it never ends. It never ends. And so the beauty of that is knowing that in this eternal moment, which is right now, you have the opportunity to act exactly how you are meant to act, right? And it's not how anyone wants you to act, right? It is how you are meant to come forth on this planet in this time, in a specific way, a specific message. So let me know if you have any questions in the chat. As I believe we're going to have a very interesting year. So as things get interesting, right, you get to become more aware, right? You get to discern a little bit more, right? And you get to tune in to your inner knowing. And that's the most important thing, because I've said it before, everything in this world wants your mind. I want you to have a strong mind. I want you to know how powerful you are, and I want you to know that you don't need to search through a million books to find the answers, right? If you withdraw yourself inwards and you do this work and you do these practices, all the answers will arise, right? Because it's so unique. Your path is so unique. Everything that you're doing is so unique to you. And when you can tune into that, that's your job, to be this unique snowflake in the infinite expression of individuated souls, to reflect back, right? That very same message that we are individuated souls on a mission on Earth, and our mission is so unique. So everyone, if there is no questions, thank you all for joining me in here. I'm just looking at all the beautiful faces. Yeah, so true. Thanks for the recentering. Yeah, always, always. Next week, I think we might talk about shadow. Let me know if that's interesting to you. Let me know actually in the alchemy community page, like, or in the comments below here too, right? Like, what kinds of things come up when you think of shadow? Because I want to play with this a little bit next week with you all. And so one of you mentioned it in the chat that you really wanted to go into like kids as like bringing up the shadow, like our children. So I'm going to try to hit on all those points next week. Otherwise, I will see you all next week, and I hope you have a beautiful day and a beautiful weekend. Bye, everyone.